Hey friend, how's it going? Welcome to part two of our preaching series, I guess you could call it. Part two of three. So, first one we looked at the prep. This one we're going to actually look at the actual delivery of it. And then the next video in part three, we're going to look at small groups and how to do discussion questions, how to make those better, and how to facilitate those a little bit better. So, today we're going to look at the actual delivery of your sermons. And the first thing I'll say is this, is especially if you're newer, is public speaking in general is just nerve-wracking. It is difficult, it is really hard, and I think it's still one of the top fears most people have is the fear of public speaking. For a huge percentage of people is their number one fear. And so it is nerve-wracking, it is scary, it is not what we are used to, and it is difficult. And I think a big part of that is because our minds are running at 1,000 miles an hour. You have so many things going on in your brain all at one time. You are thinking about, okay, my notes, and where am I at my notes, and what's next, and where am I trying to go, and oh, that person looks like they're not paying attention, this person's on their phone, and these people are talking, and how am I supposed to say this, and am I being animated enough, am I talking too fast, am I talking too slow, am I loud enough, am I too quiet, how does my face look, do I look angry, do I look, like there's just 1,000 things going on in your mind. And if you're a tech person, your mind, your CPU is going at 100%. If you're a car person, your engine's going at 8,000 RPM. Like you are just, there's a lot going on in your brain all at one very small, simple, little teeny tiny span of time. So there's just a lot to it. So I get it. It's difficult and it's not easy. And the nice thing though is that it gets so much easier over time. Over time, you learn to be comfortable with it, to get good at it. You develop rhythms, you can talk slower, all that sort of stuff. And over time, you get much more used to it and much more comfortable with it. It just takes time, which I think is kind of the unfortunate thing, but at least it's nice that it does in fact take time. And one of the little tricks I do, even sometimes at the beginning of my messages, especially if I'm extra nervous about where I'm speaking or the topic or something like that, is I'll even take a few seconds at the very beginning to be a little bit slower, to take a few extra seconds to, hey, my name's Ryan, XYZ, whatever it is I'm going to talk about. I take a few extra minutes just to be a little bit more purposeful about slowing down, maybe taking a few deeper breaths, thinking, clearing my mind just a little bit, knowing where I'm going, that sort of thing. And what I find to be, slowing down, what I find to be is a really helpful thing to kind of think of conceptually is that there's kind of two key ways that people can speak when they're speaking. Is either A, like they're trying to fight for your attention, or that they have your attention and they know about it. So how those two kind of look around is if I'm fighting for your attention, usually you end up talking a whole lot faster, and then you keep talking, and you feel like if at any point you pause at all, people are going to totally lose interest and totally lose all connection to whatever is going on. And so you feel like you got to talk and talk and talk, and there's no room for pauses, there's no room for breaks, because if you do for even the slightest moment, they will check out, they will get on their phone, they'll scroll on Instagram, you'll lose them, and it's hard listening to that for 30 minutes or so for a whole sermon. It is very hard to listen through someone that feels like every last little second they are fighting for your attention. So there's that side, but then there's the other side of talking like you have people's attention. And there's a big difference. Part of it is the cadence. Part of it is the willingness to pause, to let things process. And there's a whole bunch of other different things that kind of go into it. In fact, one person I would say, and they get a little controversial, and who cares why or for what reason? Who cares whose opinion about them? But one person in particular, I think, does this phenomenally. Probably one of the best preachers right now I think of that does this really well, that holds people's attention, is Steven Furtick. Whether you agree with him theologically or not, that's kind of besides the point. One thing we can all agree on is when he is on stage, he is very confident, and he knows for a fact everyone in that audience is hanging on his words. And he knows it, and he leans in on it. And so pretty often I'll watch his messages, even just purely for the sake of, okay, how does he command attention? How does he hold people's attention? And how does he know that he's had people's attention the entire time? And so take people's attention, assume you have it, and walk in some confidence with that. And I think also one thing that does help, and I've said this to some student leaders that we have that have preached before, and leaders, people that just don't speak too often, is that the overwhelming majority of people in that audience, 99% of the people in that audience that you're speaking to, they want you to do well. They actually want you to do well. Here's how I know. No one walks into a sermon on a Sunday morning and thinks, man, I hope today sucks. I hope the pastor fumbles over all of his words. I hope he forgets his points, and I hope that it just doesn't make sense and it's incoherent. I hope today sucks. Like, nobody wants the sermon to be bad, because a bad sermon that's 30 minutes feels like 2 hours, but a good sermon that's 30 minutes feels like 5 minutes, and they want more. And so people want you to do well. They are subconsciously rooting for you. Now, yes, you might have the maybe 1% of people that are like critiquing things. Honestly, who cares? That doesn't matter. Their opinion does not matter. And if you try to appease them, you'll lose the rest of the 99% of the people there that are actually rooting for you. So people want you to do well, and lean in on that. So I'll wrap up with this one little simple idea. I think it's important to know the environment and to know your audience. So wherever you're speaking, whether it's the house that you speak in regularly or you're visiting somewhere and you're speaking for them, it's really important to know the environment and to know the audience. And here's what I mean by that. The way I speak at a 15-person small group is very different from the way I would speak at a large church audience where there's 500, 1,000 people. They're very different ways to communicate. In a small group setting, my tones are much more muted. I'm much more conversational. I'm interacting with people, and especially in youth ministry, if you're in a small group of 10 or 15, someone's just going to say a comment out of the middle of nowhere for no reason, and learning how to okay, there's an interjection essentially, so how do I weave that in? And, you kind of work with it, whereas in a large audience, you're kind of not going to have any interruptions whatsoever, and so you can plan, you can prepare, and you can know exactly how you're going to say what, when, and you have a lot more control of the environment when you're one speaker on a stage, 500,000, larger audience. But when you're in a small group, you just have to communicate a little bit differently, and there's just a different cadence, there's a different way to do it. And I think what is a mistake people make is they try to speak one single way, no matter the size, no matter the space that they're in, but different environments do require different things. Smaller audiences require more interaction, more follow-up questions, more participation, while bigger audiences usually just require, here, let me give you information, and then the discussion stuff happens later on in a smaller group setting where you're method of delivery does change. So hopefully those few things would be helpful for you as you actually deliver your sermons. And in part 3, we're going to look at discussions after a message and how to facilitate discussion questions and write them a little bit better, so that way you get a little bit more out of your times of discussion. So thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you in part 3. Peace.